This video is sponsored by Surfshark VPN. Yeah, your boy got a sponsor finally. I'm getting that famous wealthy YouTube money I've been hearing about. Now I can afford to take my kids to Pizza Hut instead of McDonald's this week. So according to my analytics, like 2 out of every 5 of y'all fall into that Gen Zennial range of not quite old enough to actually be able to afford a mortgage, but also not young enough for it to not matter anyway. So I'm also guessing y'all remember a time when you could search for DSLs on your work computer without getting an email from HR, which means you also remember these. And if you're anything like me, you clicked on these multiple times before realizing, hey, how can I be the 1 millionth person to visit this site 10 times in a row? Well, means you probably had some personal information stolen at some point. Too bad your folks didn't have a VPN back then, or else you could have played your Flash games without your mom tasplexing you through the dining room table after she found a $400 charge on her credit card for hentai pillows. Well, you may not be able to travel time, but you can protect your privacy from these pesky identity thieves by using Surfshark VPN. What's a VPN? You're on YouTube, aren't you? What do you be doing during all of those ad reads? Searching for DSLs on your work computer? A VPN encrypts your online data and helps you to secure your personal information while surfing the web. I know how much y'all love using free public Wi-Fi. Why else would you spend all day at the library anyway? To read books? Please, that's what I have Twitter for. But as much as we do love free stuff, especially internet, it's a gold mine for hackers and identity thieves, which is why a VPN is absolutely essential. Surfshark practically turns you into John Cena online by making sure your location and download history aren't linked to your identity. So basically all the things you think the incognito tab does. But that's not all, folks, because with over 3,200 servers in 100 countries, Surfshark allows you to access blocked content libraries and streaming services from other countries, making it possible to watch programs that are otherwise restricted in your home country. Censorship and geo restrictions be damned. So use my link in the description below and enter coupon code Lil Bill to get an extra 3 months free. And if you're not completely pleased for whatever reason, Surfshark offers a risk-free 30-day money-back guarantee. Like you literally have nothing to lose, bucko. Again, use my link in the description and enter code Lil Bill at checkout and protect your neck, homie, and your privacy. And also stop looking for DSLs. All right, let's start the video. So depending on when this video actually gets uploaded, somewhere between a few weeks and like a month or two back, Cat Williams appeared on the Club Shay Shay podcast and basically ethered the whole of Black Hollywood, or at least the comedic portion of Black Hollywood. We'll have to wait for Danny Glover's interview for the rest of them niggas to get their due. Now, understand when I say ethered, I mean that in the most literal, well, not literal. Just shut up and listen for a second, nigga. My point is, Cat didn't really say anything that wasn't already public knowledge, or at least is public enough that you can go make yourself knowledgeable about it. Like, for example, Steve Harvey being a cottonmouth country bumpkin who has to resort to stealing other people's roles because he hasn't told a joke worth a chuckle to anyone but the deacon and motherboard of First Missionary Baptist Church since The Kings of Comedy was released. And also, this is a wig. But of course, aside from Cat's alleged sub 4.5 40 time at 50 years old, or the fact that he evidently reads 3,000 books a year, all nonfiction, or the fact that he hopped an 18-wheeler from Ohio to Miami with 2 racks and a Rottweiler puppy at 12 years old. The thing that had the whole of Black Twitter chirping like a Nextel in 2005 was the black man in a dress trope that Cat brought up, because every black comedian is like contractually obligated to bring up the dress thing when they get interviewed. And also the fact that this is a wig. For y'all that don't know what I'm talking about because you're either 1, not black, 2, too young, or 3, some combination of those things to know, there has, for at least since I've been alive, a pretty popular conspiracy theory among black folks that there is a coordinated effort that has been being made by Hollywood to emasculate black male actors by casting them in roles where they dress in drag. Now, depending on who you ask, the reasons behind this vary from being halfway sensible if you squint hard enough to goofier than a Disney cartoon. Some say it's to promote the gay agenda, whatever that's supposed to mean. Others say it's to keep black male actors in a second class state compared to their white peers. And some say it's to sabotage the careers of black men in Hollywood altogether. So what do I think personally? It's Dog Duke. Like, let's just get that part out of the way right now. Now, that being said, there are a number of conspiracy theories that I personally do think are more axiom than theory. Like, every black culture or lifestyle blog knowingly exploiting and perpetuating the ugliest characteristics of black culture for the sake of clout and coin, or the fact that every one of those blogs is part of a wider conspiracy to use the consumption of media, commodities, and leisure items to simultaneously sow discord in the black community and distract us with trash tweets and TV for the purpose of lulling us all into a state of false consciousness and thereby rob us of our collective capacity for critical thought that would otherwise force us to conclude that the only way to escape our systemic and institutionalized oppression is a direct revolutionary action. This specific theory, in my opinion, is USDA prime grade field fertilizer for no other reason than, yeah, and none of these niggas were worse for wear if my memory serves me right. But still, the black men in drag thing is harmful. Maybe not in the ways that most people think it is, though. And I think that the discourse around it sheds light on a bigger issue with black media that often goes unaddressed and is even celebrated depending on who's doing it.
Sometimes when it comes to black men expressing themselves or playing with gender expression, I find that black people will kind of excuse it in very extreme ways. Like, oh, this is a way to keep the black man down. This is maybe the white man's propaganda. And it's sticky. That's an inflammatory statement, right? So like it'll land on multiple ears. But I also think it's kind of lazy because it doesn't apply any nuance. It doesn't apply any critical thinking. I feel like we hear similar discussions when we talk about Black single motherhood, even that. I know that's like not exactly related, but just even trying to say, well, that's just a way to keep the Black community held back. And it's like, or when we see Black men doing these performances, it's kind of just because they want to, and it should be allowed to exist. And there's just so many different ways to think about it, but the one that sticks the most is it's the white man's propaganda, because I just think that's the most inflammatory way. It's also you have something to blame it on. So you can really solidify like this is a problem rather than actually trying to see what is this about.
In my opinion, right, as someone within the community, but obviously I'm not a drag queen, I think that they exist in society as disruptors, right, of disruptors of how we're expected to perform. So whether that's sexual orientation, gender presentation, race, right? Because you don't have to be queer to be a drag queen, right? Yeah. And folks in community or who are familiar with drag queens understand that this is nuance. And another thing is there's a lack of knowledge of who and what drag queens are, right? Drag absolutely is an art. It absolutely is a community. But drag is not an identity. At the end of the day, drag is a job, right? There's nowhere on your license that's going to say M, F, or DQ. You don't identify as a drag queen.
Like I said in the Wealth Can't Buy You Whiteness video, comedy is subjective, but too often we use that fact to fart around the reason it is. In order for a joke to work, I, the presenter, and you, the audience, have to agree on a premise, or else it's not going to land. The premise usually relies on some commonality between us, a shared experience, a shared value, or shared knowledge of some sort. This is why you can't just walk onto an open mic stage and regale the audience with your story about that wild night you had with your boys without giving them enough info beforehand for them to understand why you waking up hungover in some white family's living room and nothing but cowboy boots and a Hello Kitty thong is supposed to be funny. And I kind of feel like I've told that joke already. Now you see what I did there, right? If you did find that funny, which I don't blame you if you don't, it's because I already introduced the idea of telling a joke without proper setup as being ludicrous. And you agreeing that it's ludicrous, you found humor in the fact that I just contradicted my own point by telling you the ending of a story that you have no other knowledge of. So you're not really laughing at the fact that I may or may not have woken up with no recollection of how I managed to get my 6'2", 200+ pound body into a pair of mascot panties. But the fact that we both agree that me telling you that without setting it up with appropriate context beforehand and expecting a laugh out of it is ludicrous. You see, I did it again. This slide makes absolutely no sense if you don't know who this is. It's Gucci Mane, by the way. I used as an example in the past Steve Crowder, whose entire shtick revolves around a wink and a nod to the audience. If you don't share his values, you're not going to get his jokes. Or even if you do understand the premise of his jokes, you're not going to see the humor in them. And the fact that you don't see the humor in them is the joke itself.
Of course, I grew up in a high school which was largely Middle Eastern, so you'd get these Middle Eastern wannabe thugs. You're nice people, but you can't pull off the thug look. Like, oh, you know what? I am going to mess you up hardcore. Hey, check out the German white boy. I want my nut on the left side. Yes, that's the crib side. They're cruising down the street for chicks like... It's gonna get a comment at Media Matters.
Like literally, that's basically half his punchlines. I did a whole video a while back on how conservative comedy basically boils down to 1, let's point and laugh at all these people that make us uncomfortable, and 2, let's assume that these people are offended by the joke because they don't share our values and point and laugh at them for not getting it or being offended by it. It's one big inside joke that's not really funny to anyone who's hasn't already agreed on the premise beforehand. It works in that context, but it's also lazy, predictable, and very uncreative. Which now leads me to the dress thing. I've personally never really been offended by the dress thing, but I do, and for a long time have always thought it was lazy and indicative of creative bankruptcy. Oh, I'm gonna get to you in a second, nigga. Just you wait. 9 times out of 10, when black men dress in drag in movies or on TV, it is for comedic effect. And 9 of those 10 times, it's the same 2 jokes over and over and over again. Black women are loud, are combative, are domineering, are sexually deviant. Or if not that, they're just mammies. That's basically it. Like, I'm serious. Y'all go find me a black cishet man doing drag for comedy and tell me he doesn't fall into one, if not several of those tropes. So you're starting to see the issue now, right? Compare that to the way that white women are portrayed when a man dresses in drag to portray them. They're some combination of naive, materialistic, vain, curmudgeonly. My point being, when a man puts on a dress, he acts in accordance to accept the stereotypes of the woman he is portraying, whether that woman is black, white, Latina, Asian, or anything else. So the black man in the dress trope is just Jezebel, it's Sapphire, it's Mammy, or some combination of those tropes with an extra step. Matter of fact, the fact that it is a man portraying the trope makes it more acceptable to exaggerate the trope's characteristics to cartoonish degrees. Yeah, Medea pulling a 38 snub nose special out of her cleavage is ridiculous, But it works as a joke because the audience has already agreed that the trope has some humor in it intrinsically anyway. But again, why is that funny? What is inherently funny about a black woman with a cartoonishly big butt and a dookie braid wig attempting to fight every other character on every other episode of her show? Or what about a black woman practically throwing herself on every straight man she sees? Or literally anything that Madea does?
Because I've grown up with people like, because they see that I'm black, and I grew up in a mostly white area. They're, you know, reciting things that Madea said. Maybe only one person cited Shanae because not every white person have seen Martin. But yeah, that's like my view of it. It's the angle when they do put on that dress. What do they choose to say? How do they choose to perform? And it's always this overtop, harmful, misogynoir. It's misogynoir, but it's harmful, like harmful tropes of Black women. When non-Black people go up to us and say, recite lyric lines from Medea's and these other shows where Black men dress up as us, it's to me, it's telling me that they see Black women as loud, as ghetto, as argumentative, as unreasonable, as irrational, bigoted, undesirable, and as furthermore, the list goes on.
Now, I know a lot of y'all are going to hit me with the "it ain't that deep" bill, but again, shut up, nigga, and let me talk to you for a second. I'm not going to sit here and pretend like Shanae and Wanda weren't funny beyond the tropes they portrayed, to me at least. But what I am saying is every joke that those characters and Madea are used to tell are at least cued off of those tropes. And in the worst cases, like Madea and Martin in Big Mama's house, the trope is the joke. Well, one of two jokes in Martin's case, the latter that I will get to a little bit later on down the line. And like I said, that's lazy. It's chicken and watermelon jokes with an extra shot of misogyny to chase it. Imagine Malibu's Most Wanted if it were written completely straight. Yeah, that's basically every Madea movie in a nutshell. So yeah, there's that Tyler Perry video that y'all been asking Feek to make for like the last 3 years, or at least the Cliff Notes version of it. I'll take my Nebula sponsorship now, please. Now, please. This isn't to say that these tropes haven't been played for comedic effect by Black women. Off the top, you got what? Friday, Scary Movie, Booty Call, Coming to America, and so forth. The difference is those women were used to set up a bigger joke. Simi tricking Patrice into thinking he's actually the prince, which wound up setting up the climax of that movie. The moviegoers in Scary Movie being so pissed at Brenda for talking through their movie that they actually cheer the killer, even help him do the deed to her. Which, I mean, is problematic in itself for a bunch of other reasons we're not getting into. But my point is the joke wasn't just, LOL, Black women be blacking, y'all. It was the setup for something else. Using stereotypes as the cue for a joke is a fine line, and it's something you don't really get good at without practice. Which is why most people really shouldn't attempt to do it in the first place. Take Bill Burr, for example, who regularly makes jokes about Black people. Instead of just doing the har Black people be like thing, or the "oh shucks man, please disregard my inability to comprehend or care about social norms," or yuck, he uses his own struggle to understand Blackness despite being in community with Black people as the premise of most of his jokes. He then uses that to build up enough goodwill with the audience to take subtle jabs at Black culture for its admitted obtuseness. Something he probably wouldn't be able to get away with if he didn't already have that rapport with Black people built up.
There's too much information in the world, and every group of people misses a little bit. White people totally missed the lotion seminar at some point in history. I don't know if it's because we can't see it, you know? Black people get ashy, it looks like they like leaned up against a chalkboard or something. You know, they can see it. They miss it, their friends help them out. Like, look at your ashy motherfucking elbow. What is wrong with you, right? We miss that shit the way black people miss the whole register your weapons summit. Right?
That's the thing. Even if you are in community with black folks, you can't just go headlong into the rappers be criminals thing and think we're going to co-sign it, because a co-sign is effectively an endorsement. And it means we support what you're saying, even if it's said in jest. So if what you're saying is harmful, it means we're endorsing our own self-harm. Or maybe not self, but it's 2:00 in the morning, y'all. Give me a break, man. When you do a black people be like, or a Latinos be like, or an insert marginalized group here be like, and that's it, that's the entire joke, no further commentary besides my black friend eats so much chicken, I think he might have grown a gizzard. It perpetuates a narrative about that group of people that's more often than not harmful, especially if your audience doesn't regularly interact with that group of people. I've referenced this article in the past that says white people who don't have intimate enough relationships with non-white people, so most white people honestly, base their perceptions of those non-white people largely on the media they consume. So if I, a white teenager from like a, I don't know, Kansas City suburb or something, sees Chris Rock doing his black people and niggas bit, I might understandably look at that and say, you know what? I guess there are good and bad ones after all. Or if I am trying to make a point about the absurdity of race and racism, like, for example, the Clayton Bigsby sketch from Chappelle's Show, somebody is going to watch that and take the complete wrong message away from it. That's one of the reasons Dave quit the show to begin with, if y'all don't remember. Point that I'm getting at is jokes stop being just jokes when the premise is based on more than just personal anecdotes, and more importantly, has the potential to cause harm by perpetuating harmful stereotypes. The implication goes beyond just making people laugh, but making people think. Think, Mark! And when your joke, whether purposefully or inadvertently, reinforces people's implicit bias against particular groups of people, it can indeed have very real world consequences. As I mentioned in several videos now, black women are the most overqualified demographic in terms of education, and yet are paid anywhere between 15 and 35% less than white women and men of comparable education. Black women are 1.5 times more likely to be killed by police than white women. Black women are also 2.5 times more likely to die during pregnancy or childbirth than non-Hispanic white women, and are even encouraged by some doctors to not speak up about their concerns that they're experiencing, not just with pregnancy, but any health issue, as to not appear overly dramatic and combative and irksome or whatever, and thus wind up discouraging proper care. It's a wild cycle of events, is it not?
Sometimes as African American women, we're a bit more dramatic, in that you go to the doctor and you complain and you complain and you complain, and you're not taken serious because you cried wolf the entire pregnancy.
That ain't me, boo. I don't know what you talking about, but go ahead.
I didn't say you. I just said as African American women, we want to also make sure you're being serious with your doctor and not playing the game so I can take you off work. Because then we see you 25 times in the pregnancy. It's hard to believe that there's a true problem when there's a true problem.
In a similar way, the hypersexualization of black women in media disqualifies them from being victims of abuse, both sexual and otherwise. We saw this in Tory Lanez' trial, where even though Meg was not the one on trial, nor was she the one taking Tory to court, and I still don't understand how some of y'all don't comprehend how the legal system works. She was the one who was constantly having her sexual past brought up by every rap blog as though she was the one on trial, which, regardless how does that justify her getting shot in the f***ing foot?
Well, for one, I think that all perceptions of women in media across races come through the male lens because we live in a patriarchy. So the majority of media's history and the portrayal of women is just like, how do men view women? And that's how we have come to view women. So I think that's why the audience trusts that, okay, if Black men say that Black women are like this, then Black women must really be like this because he's a man, so what he says goes.
All of these factors add up to Black women being largely dehumanized and therefore deemed unworthy of the same sort of attention and protection that white women are afforded, due in no small part to the infantile way that they are depicted by media. This, I think, is no better shown in the fact that Black women are more than 2 times more likely to be victims of IPV. And believe it or not, those numbers actually go up for queer Black women because of the dual dehumanization of both Blackness and being a femme. It's a Pygmalion effect of stereotype creating the trope, and now the trope perpetuates the stereotype and thereby the implications of it. Again, it's a wild, vicious cycle, man. So you see where I'm getting at now, right? It's deeper than just jokes when those jokes perpetuate a perception of Black women as being combative, uncooperative, aggressive, overly dramatic. All things that, again, lead to the dehumanization and honestly the lives of Black women being very much imperiled many times by the very folk whose job it is to protect and to care for them, i.e. the police and medical professionals. Oh, and also niggas. Yeah, we can't discount niggas. And listen, this isn't me saying that you can't do edgy humor. I do it all the time. But there's got to be more to it than just, oh, he, she, they actually went there. There's got to be a point to it. Or again, we're not going to co-sign it. Or at least most of us who know better won't. Because some of you niggas think Theo Vaughn is funny for some reason. And that's a whole nother video that I'm probably not going to bother doing. All I'm going to say is I can guarantee you that Theo has watched every single scene of Ghetto Gaggers and probably paid for them. So again, I ask, what makes Madea inherently funny? Well, there's really only 2 reasons why, if you ask me. Either you find the tropes that Tyler portrays and therefore reinforces as being inherently funny because you, at least to some degree, ascribe to those stereotypes having at least a kernel of truth to them, or something more sinister may be afoot here.
I think personally it goes hand in hand with like homophobia and transphobia. I also think it has to do with like fragile masculinity, where even how like Cat Williams mentioned, the part of protecting his virgin starfish, that's what we'll call it. It's very clear that like there's like these really rooted things within the Black community that come from a lot of it from Christianity. Christianity teaching folks, this is how a man should be, it's how a man should present.
Okay, so let me talk about one of my favorite comedies ever for a second, Tropic Thunder. Yeah, it ain't really meant to be watched with breadtube eyes, but not for the reason some of y'all may think. If you've been on the internet for more than a day, I'm sure you've at least seen this screen because the internet, obviously. Well, big spoiler warning here for a movie that's old enough for a driver's license or to get a backstage pass at a Drake concert. RDJ plays a character named Kirk Lazarus, an award-winning method actor in the vein of like Daniel Day-Lewis or somebody. Just prior to the events of the movie, Lazarus undergoes a series of surgical procedures to make him look like a nigga for this one role. It's funny just saying that out loud. Again, it's Al Pacino instructing the crew to treat him like he was really blind in Scent of a Woman. Or again, DDL demanding to be spoon-fed and carried around in his wheelchair around set like he actually has cerebral palsy in my left foot. My point is, LOL blackface was never the joke. It was spoofing method actors and how ridiculous the practice and practitioners can be. I'd even argue as a meta commentary on how some white folks genuinely believe they know black people better than black people if they just listen to enough Tupac and watch Boys in the Hood enough times.
Australian.
Which now brings me to the dress thing. Again, due to those historical factors I mentioned earlier, black men are conditioned to not only practice but enforce hypermasculinity within community as a means to compensate for our historical emasculation by white supremacy. Again, we're talking about an entire demographic of people who were, one, not only taught that they had to live up to hegemonic standards of masculinity in order to become such, but two, taught that we just inherently lack the ability to be such. So yeah, there you have it. Rocking the hard, please.
I also think that a lot of cishet black men find strength in and this is anecdotal, find strength in this idea of like, well, we are feared, we are respected, right? Because in a culture of domination, there is this false equivalence of fear and respect, right? And so this is our only source of respect, this fear that we can attain from being hyper masculine, in many ways hyper heterosexual, right? And so you, as this representation of femininity while also being a black man doing your own thing on your own time, is a threat to the one source of respect that we have access to. The issue is there's no respect in that fear at all.
Right.
Fixation of performing this performative masculinity is, like you said, toxic masculinity. There's a lot of toxic masculinity, again, in all communities, but I think every community has their own flavor of toxic masculinity. For example, and me being Afro-Latina, me having an Hispanic dad, I'm aware of machismo culture. That's their flavor of toxic masculinity. For the Black community, our toxic masculinity can be as simple as it showcases in multiple ways. It can showcase them calling women females, reducing them down to their genitalia, which inherently is going to leave out someone like me who's a trans woman. It's like this like forcing men to conform within the Black community. If you don't, present in a certain way, then automatically they'll call them gay. That's another route of things. So for example, like, if you get too much into, certain aspects of fantasy, now you want some white gay shit or whatnot, potentially could be sad. Don't let yourself explore your fashion too much. Don't let yourself do something outside of what they expect you to look like. And that sometimes that forces people into these boxes that they don't realize is reinforcing sometimes stereotypes.
So my point is that, we're conditioned to be antagonistic to anyone and thing that presents as effeminate, including cisgender women, but especially those whose physiology presents as male for what should be obvious reasons, i.e. gay and bisexual cisgendered men and trans women. On the other hand, you got a significant portion of cisgender women who, for one reason or another, feel their identity is threatened or otherwise undermined by the very existence of trans femmes. And listen, a lot of it can be just chalked up to straight up bigotry, but as a recovering homo and transphobe myself, it'd be disingenuous for me to just sit here and say, well, you know, all transphobes are transphobic because they just hate trans people. Again, due to those historical factors I just mentioned, black men are conditioned to not only practice but enforce hypermasculinity within community as a means to compensate for our historical emasculation by white supremacy. Issues that primarily or even exclusively impact cisgender black women are already taken about as seriously as Jack Harlow's artistry. So the fear many have is that people who don't appear to be women calling themselves such will further undermine those issues. Basically, it's respectability politics by another name, to be honest. It's that same, no one is going to take black America seriously until we start conforming to white supremacist standards of dress and behavior BS. Understand something. I'm not by any means trying to justify homo or transphobia. I'm just trying to get some of y'all who may not talk to your transphobic aunties and grands why they may think the way that they do. Whether that matters to you, honestly, that's your prerogative. But my point in bringing it up is to make my case for why the cross-dressing for comedy bit does the most harm to trans femmes.
There was this black woman turf that basically called my trans mother, T.S. Madison, you know, you're the Medeas of the world. They called literally, yeah. So a full-blown trans woman had transitioned in the late 80s, calling her the Medeas of the world before she even predated Tyler Perry doing Lion Gate films. Okay, yeah. So it reinforces transphobia. It really does. It genuinely does. And it's as if like that's how people like non-trans people, so cis people think that's how trans people navigate the world, that we're just gonna be like these really rough around the edges type of like depictions of women. We're just like, that's not the case. And again, it's being weaponized against us. Like, and I am lucky to have not gotten that, especially as a cis passing trans woman. Hell, I have cut off all my hair, and still with my short hair you see right now, I am still identified, treated as a woman. So for a trans woman like my mother, T.S. Madison, to be called a Medea of the world, it's just wild. And it's just kind of like, again, it's reinforcing the audience's confirmation bias of what they think of trans people, what they think of like that we're like these out of character, out of place people who are shoehorning ourselves into spaces that we don't belong in.
I know this may be hard for y'all who don't remember a time before SpongeBob to comprehend, but before he basically co-opted BET and became the de facto mayor of Atlanta, apparently, Tyler Perry was actually a playwright. And a halfway decent one, if I'm gonna keep it real. See, the Medea character wasn't nearly as flanderized like 25 years ago, or even in Tyler's first movie. I mean, she was still cringe, but not witness protection cringe. And yes, a lot of jokes did lean on the tropes I mentioned earlier, and there's always been a minstrel adjacent vibe about Medea, even going back to the play days. But that wasn't Medea's whole character. She was the archetypical archetype, whatever, nigga. She was Big Mama. That's my point. The black matriarch to whom everyone went for wisdom and from whom everyone received correction. You gotta remember who these plays were targeted at: black church Christians, probably the most socially conservative subdivision of blackdom after hoteps and house niggas, in that order. When Medea started picking up steam in like the late 90s or so, if I remember correctly. When Medea started picking up steam in like the late 90s or so, if I remember correctly, there was generally two reactions to the character. Either full-on hostility born of, let's keep it a buck, the target audience is fragile gender identities or befuddled amusement at the character itself. In my house, at least, my family wasn't necessarily laughing at Medea's jokes or her antics. They were laughing at Medea herself, or more accurately, they were laughing at Tyler. That's the thing. Play Medea broke the fourth wall in a way that movie Medea just can't. Half the point of seeing a live performance is participation. You are a part of the show. Matter of fact, half the stuff that Tyler did and said was directly to the audience. We were all in on the bit. And I think this is what wound up winning some of those hostiles over to Tyler's side. The wink and the nudge that this character is the joke. No matter how accurately this 6 foot tall, 200-pound black man mimics the mannerisms of an old black granny, we know that he knows that we know that at the end of the day, that's still a man with a wig on. That's the joke, and that's what makes it problematic. Look, I already know there's a bunch of what about niggas in the comments. Yeah, Clayton Bigsby, again, shut up and let me say something to you. The point isn't that you shouldn't do trans jokes, black jokes, or any other marginalized population as the premise of your punchline. But if the premise, again, is just pointing and laughing at a group of people for just existing, especially an already vulnerable population, then throw it out and try it again. Unless it's white people, we can clown them because they're not real anyway. Another example of this is White Chicks, which has a handful of jokes off the top of my head that rely on transphobia to some degree to work, including one that's basically a subplot of the duration of the movie.
Baby, he's not what you think. He's a man.
You're sick.
And listen, I'm not trying to condemn a 20-year-old movie for not living up to modern sensibilities, but what I am saying is there is and has been a precedent set of dehumanizing trans folk, femmes especially, for the sake of a punchline. And listen, I already know what a lot of y'all are going to say in the comments because I said most of it myself at some point. Oh, well, you know, comedy is subjective, Bill. It's just jokes. It ain't that deep. So you mean to tell me we can make fun of cishet men, but not women or queer people now? Whatever happened to equality? Again, shut up, nigga. None of that matters. Literally, none of it matters. Which is why I didn't really spend a lot of time rebutting it. I only did so much as to lead to this point that I'm getting to now. I've said this multiple times now, and I'll still say that arguably the biggest influence on my brand of comedy has been Dave Chappelle. Which is why when he pulls garbage like what he's been doing since signing that Netflix deal is equal parts frustrating, infuriating, and honestly disappointing.
These people acted like I needed them to be funny. Well, that's ridiculous. I ain't doing trans jokes no more. You know what I'm gonna do tonight? Tonight, I'm doing your own handicap jokes. Well, they're not as organized as the gays. And I love punching down. There's probably a handicap in the back right now because that's where they usually make them sit. I came here to laugh at transgender people. I didn't know this nigga was gonna make jokes about us. Come on, y'all, let's get the fuck up out of here.
Oh, brother, this guy fucking sucks!
Maybe I'm still looking at him with rose-tinted glasses, but I remember Killing Them Softly. I remember watching tapes of those Def Comedy Jam sets. I know that there was at least a period where he could write a joke that wasn't just a conservative comedy two-piece of, haha, let's point and laugh at these people that make us uncomfortable and then laugh some more when they call us on the carpet for being dickheads. Well, Dave doesn't hate trans people, you say. He said it himself. Didn't you hear the Daphne story? Yeah, we not gonna get it. Actually, no, yeah, let's go ahead and talk about that for a second, because the way Dave spun that story really drives home my issue with him and pretty much the whole point of this video. It all comes down to a single word. One, the idea that he was somehow Daphne's biggest cheerleader, which no, he wasn't based on the stories, but more importantly, the fact that he omitted the whole subplot about her child being taken away from her and that being the reason she did what she did. It's evidence enough to me that Dave never really respected Daphne enough to be considered a friend to her. Real friends don't use your story to victimize themselves. They honor your legacy by at least attempting to be better in your name. Respect. That's what I'm getting at. I did go back and force myself to sit through his latest set, and admittedly, there are parts in there that are genuinely funny, but for the most part, it's the same wink and smile at the hard cam BS that people like Crowder do. And Dave is, or at least I always thought that he was better than that. The reason it's a problem isn't the offense in a vacuum. Again, why black people but no queer jokes? But it's a problem because it denotes a lack of respect for a person's existence, and therefore it makes it dangerous. Like I said about Tyler, the whole premise of Dave's trans jokes is the absurdity of a male appearing person trying to pass off as a woman, and by extension, vice versa. That dehumanizes trans folks. Practically speaking, what you're saying is, you don't make sense. You are not real. Therefore, you don't belong here. And what kind of behavior do you think that's going to encourage not only towards trans folk, but by them?
Also, just like, they don't lose anything by a trans woman existing.
Yeah, right.
Me going to pee in the restroom and to go and washing my hands doesn't cause any harm to any cis woman, any cis black woman. Me going on dates with men that are interested in me doesn't make them lose anything. It's just like, it's in a way, like, it's kind of like, why are you in my pants? Like, why are you in my panties? Like, why are you panty checking me? Like, you know, it's just like borderline sexual harassment at this point, because it's just like, they would hate for these things to be used against them, but it's all okay to go use all these misogynistic terms that they would hate to be used against them. So misogyny against trans women's okay for cis women, but don't you dare use the same rhetoric used against a trans woman against me.
Of the trans or gender non-conforming people killed last year, 84% were POCs. 84%. And over a third of the people killed were killed by a romantic partner, a friend, or a family member. That's more than 1 in 3, and I was never a math whiz. You can check my report cards if you don't believe me. According to UCLA's Williams Institute of Law, 81% of transgender adults have thought about taking their own life. 42% have attempted it, and 56% have admitted to non-suicidal self-harm. In no small part because of the dog duke that people like Dave spit for low-hanging punchlines. You're starting to see where I'm going here, right? Regardless of your opinion of why a person is the way that they are, whether it's a lifestyle choice or science or something in between, that's irrelevant to the fact that their life matters. And nigga, that's all that matters. Listen, I don't want to hear about feminism and the modern woman when black women, again, are still 2 times more likely to be victims of IPV than their white peers. I don't want to hear about the gay agenda or more than twice as many queer youths attempt to unalive themselves as straight ones. And no, this isn't a problem that you just pray away and go on with your bigotry. It's something that you gotta ask yourself, what role am I playing in all of this? Because the stone cold reality is we are killing our own people, y'all. Every time we gaslight a femme who calls us on the carpet for our casual misogyny and we brush it aside. Every time we hurt someone with our words and deflect with the obligatory, oh, it's just jokes. Every time we prioritize our comfort over their safety. And then we got the gall to bitch about when they don't reply to our DM. Nigga. way. All that out of the way. I'm not just going to sit here and pontificate and wave my finger at the big bad transphobes and misogynists, because like I said, I was one, or at least am a recovering one. I'm really not quite sure how the 12 steps work. Let's move on. I'm trying to be better is my point. So I get the whole, but I don't hate gay people, how can I be homophobic thing. I get the whole, how can you call me a misogynist when I'm always talking up black women. That's the thing. It's not about hate. It's about respect. Again, you got to ask yourself, where does this conspiracy even come from? Why is it such a prevalent part of black culture that the minute that interview was over, like 5,100 tweets, videos, and pods went up talking about it? Why in the year of 2024 is a nigga in a dress such a big freaking deal when Kurt Cobain was being praised for it 30 years ago? Because he's not a nigga. I alluded to another video several times now that I did a while ago, but basically what I said in that video was that black men are, again, conditioned to practice hypermasculinity to the point of toxicity due to our historical emasculation due to white supremacy. For as long as we've been American or even Caribbean, or they'll just basically from the time we met white people, black men have been told that we are just incapable of being men, both literally in that we aren't even capable of being human, but also in that we just lack the traits necessary for hegemonic manhood. And because white supremacy has ganked the system in a way in which black men just aren't afforded the same tools to achieve hegemonic manhood as white men, i.e. wealth, we overcompensate by overindulging in the traits we can control, like our promiscuity, for example. Basically, from the time we met white people, we have been being told that there is only one way to be a man and that we are just inherently incapable of being that. So explicitly black phrasing like no homo or pause or whatever serve as social sanctions when another black man deviates from expected norms of masculinity. When we see another black man behaving or dressing in a way that is anything outside of expected norms of traditional manhood, it's not damaging to just him personally, but to all of us. Even if subliminally, we are acknowledging just how fragile black masculinity is by doing this. If we don't take us seriously, no one else will, which is not wrong, like at all. That's the thing. But again, that doesn't answer the question of why the dress is such a big deal. Why is queerness so threatening to cishet manhood? Well, again, going back to black men's emasculation, we are conditioned to overemphasize traditionally male traits like strength, independence, aggression, dominance even. Think about phrases like blow her back out or beat the pussy up. Phrases that once again originate from black lexicon. And no, I do not need to read a book to know that. I've been black my whole life, so I know what I'm talking about. Even if these phrases are benign and many times, if not most times, said in jest in the context of their use, they still denote dominance, specifically by a male partner over a female one. Because we are taught to see women and the traits associated with them as subservient and therefore weak in comparison to us. That's the thing. It's something it took me a long time to realize. We are trained to see femininity as beneath us. And therefore, when a man or at least a male appearing person acts in a way that is beneath their nature, it reflects poorly, not just on that one, but again, on all of us. It makes us all look weak. And again, it's not completely wrong.
White men are the arbiters of what is and what is not with respect to gender presentation and gender performance. So I think that society grants white men a pass to step in and out of conventional or traditional performances of masculinity because they do have access to that hegemonic masculinity that you referred to earlier, right? And like what I was gonna say that was anecdotal is like growing up in high school in a predominantly white high school. I seen white men do things that black men would say is sus in a heartbeat.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that they can do that and still have access to picking whatever women that they want. Because one, they have increased access to capital, right? Right. If we're talking about the racial wealth gap. And so one of the biggest factors of, the big dick contest, I don't know if you, but right, is who has the most money in the room. You may be the toughest guy, but you can be Lil Bro real quick by a man who has more money than you, right? More access than you, because you understand that in a patriarchal society, that man is more likely to be, is more desirable, has more resources, and can navigate this system with much more ease, and in a much more hegemonic, traditionally masculine way than you ever could. And that increased access, or the perception of that increased access, makes everybody grant them a pass.
All right, so here's a semi-unnecessary editor's note, but considering that the inspiration behind this video is like 2 months old at the time of editing, and the facilitator of it is basically torpedoed his credibility by gifting the He's Just Bitter crowd with enough ammo for a redneck reunion, I thought it'd be worth drawing attention to a more recent case study to further reinforce the points in this video. So in light of the recent civil suit filed by model and R&B singer Cassie Ventura against the devil himself, Sean P. Puffy Combs, a number of other allegations have come out since, including a lawsuit that was filed by a former employee of Beelzebub, alleging, among other things, sex and drug trafficking, sexual assault against minors, attempted homicide, and of course, most scandalous of all, having sex with Meek Mill and Usher. And of course, Black Twitter and every Mumbai-based rap blog hyper-focused on that last part because, I mean, why wouldn't they? And Black Twitter has vacillated somewhere between the trial of R. Kelly and the story of Gangstalicious episodes of The Boondock Saints. And as predictable as the public's response has been, and as equally predictable and even more entertaining it's been to watch Meek basically pull the "my girlfriend is actually real, you guys, she just lives in another state" card, two things really stuck out to me aside from the fact that Andrew Tate, of all people, thought he could chime in without getting clowned. The fact that, again, the gay sex rumors have completely overshadowed the honest-to-God crimes that are alleged in that suit. And two, as far as I can tell, Usher hasn't really been getting goofed on, or at least nowhere near the same level that Meek has. Now, I've already spent 2 videos talking about how black folks treat SA, especially against males, even less seriously than we do type 2 diabetes, so I won't dwell on that. But the fact that Meek kind of justifiably feels the need to overstate his hetero-ness while Usher is basically just chilling is kind of what I mean about black men's fragile masculinity. Like, look at it. Meek's whole image is built on being this hyper masculine, even hyper hetero street dude, while Usher is a singing nigga. Like, we expect Usher to be soft, for lack of better phrasing, but in doing so, he has a level of freedom in both his gender and sexual expression that Meek just doesn't. In adopting that stereotypically hypermasculine black presentation of manhood as his identity, Meek is restricted to being just that and only that. Like Herbie mentioned, he doesn't have the freedom to explore other expressions of masculinity besides, hyper-violent hood nigga, and still maintain the same level of marketability or even desirability as he would by basically just being a caricature of what mainstream media depicts black manhood as. It reinforces a point I made in those videos where when I talked about how people clown Keke Palmer's baby daddy for making less money than her as opposed to, just being a dickhead, it means we're only opposed to oppressive systems insofar as they oppress us individually. But on the same token, we won't hesitate to weaponize it for our own ends. So we all are complicit in patriarchy to some extent is what I'm saying. So yeah, there you have it. How many times has a black person said or done something out of pocket and the white neo-libs treated it like an epidemic? The other side of this coin is one that I brought up at the very beginning of this video and that I keep bringing up. The point that a lot of white people, in my opinion, intentionally ignored about Dave's points in the closer was that, yes, queer marginalization is prioritized over black oppression in the public zeitgeist, but only when it intersects with whiteness. And that's what makes Dave and anyone else's points about that so head ass. A lot of people see oppression as a scale when really it's a Venn diagram. We talk about privilege and marginalization in terms of levels when really we should be talking about it in terms of types. Yes, there is a certain type of privilege that I enjoy as a cishet man, but it does not negate my marginalization as a black American and vice versa. The same way that a white queer person watching this video is marginalized by that queerness, but not in the same way that I, a black man, am marginalized by my black manhood. Queer people were never enslaved in this country based upon their queerness, nor did they have to endure the economic impact of policies like redlining or the repeal of Special Field Order 15 because of their queerness. But black queers did because they are black. That's the thing. Blackness and queerness are not mutually exclusive. Neither is blackness and womanhood. But because we are not taught to respect queerness or womanhood in the same way that we do manhood, all we can see is black. We don't see anyone other than men as being our equal. And so when we see black men behaving in a way that is not indicative of traditional manhood, we become hostile because, again, we're seeing ourselves being demoted from our rightful place of dominance as men. Going back to that wealth as whiteness video, a lot of us don't want liberation from the current social order so much as we want the same privilege as white men within this current order. And that's the issue, y'all. Again, it's not about hate. It's about respect. Do you respect black women and do you respect black queers the same way you do white men? So why do you have such a visceral reaction to Kevin Hart in a dress, but not Dave Chappelle in whiteface? Or Martin in a wig, but not Tisha Campbell in baggy suit and a fake goatee?
Well, if we want to start with white masculinity, they don't have anything to protect, I don't think. I don't think white masculinity, there's nothing to be honored, to be preserved. Of course, there's the traditional man, the American dream, like all of that. There's an image, sure. But I don't think that there is particularly any one image being pushed forward in Hollywood or just even exists in the media of this is an image of a white man that emasculates all white men or is a threat to white masculinity. Whereas with Black men, there is this, I guess, this sort of attitude that the masculinity has to be protected so that it can stand up next to white masculinity, instead of we should be focused on, okay, well, what are the different ways that Black masculinity can be defined, can be expressed, instead we're trying to say like, okay, here's how we can preserve it so that if the time comes where it has to go toe to toe with white masculinity, it can stand in front of it. But I think that's aimless.
Going back to the whiteface example, the reason you don't see most white people taking an issue with it is because they don't have to deal with the real world baggage that comes with a non-white person mocking their appearance and lampooning their behavior. Generally speaking, you don't lose a job or are frowned upon in professional circles or are literally endangered by law enforcement for appearing or acting too white. The worst you get is a snarky comment and a hurt feeling every once in a while. The problem with Black, and for that matter, yellow, brown, and red face, is again the real world baggage of what those depictions carry with them. When a non-white person does whiteface, it's in a way a form of protest. It's a marginalized person reclaiming some degree of power back from the oppressor by taking the piss out of them. When a white person does ethnic jokes, you're doing so from a place of privilege, from a pedestal. You're punching down at people who already have to work that much harder to be seen as equal to you. Many times having to imitate your very behavior and even appearance to do so. Yeah, this video got too deep for me to make that joke. This is not dissimilar to when men cross-dress for comedy, especially as black women. When a woman lampoons a man, she is reclaiming a level of power back from patriarchy by taking the piss out of the supposed superior sex.
As a man, why are you born in the month of February? Kind of fruity to me. I don't know. It seems, I don't know. It's weird to me. It's weird. It is fruity. Men do be gay.
Whereas when a man does the opposite, he runs the risk of punching down by giving people even more of a reason to mock the supposed weaker vessel and reinforce the social hierarchy as it stands, basically cutting off any attempts at equity off at the knees. So where exactly do trans folk fit into all of this, you may be asking? Well, in my personal opinion, I think not insignificant amount of cis people treat transgenderism like ethnic face, if that makes any sense. I think a lot of cis men treat trans mass folk like they're playing dress up, basically. And that's why our masculinity doesn't feel threatened by them, because we're already operating from a place of privilege. Of course you want to be like us. It's actually kind of cute that you try. But that's just it. You're trying. On the other hand, I think not insignificant portion of cis women treat transgender folk as though they're mocking womanhood by choosing to be women, even though that's not how it works. But that's aside from the point.
Regarding the turf one, like that's never made sense to me, because I've always thought, if anything, trans women are honoring womanhood. Like, womanhood is so fucking difficult, especially when you're hyper feminine. Like, even for me to do this, like, I had to put on the wig and put on the makeup and all the jewelry, right? I'm gonna take this shit off as soon as we hang up.
Right.
But to want to be a part of that, especially knowing all that women go through, I feel like it really honors femininity and womanhood in a way that could never be honored when it's put in a humorous space like that. And I feel like the anger is most definitely misdirected.
I think we're all battling the same issues, and it would be a lie to say that, you know, I or anybody who is gender nonconformant is on some sort of moral high ground, as if queer folk, gender nonconformant folk don't deal with femphobia, anti-blackness, misogyny, right? Those things are happening, right? But I think that there's a lot of work that goes into identifying as non-binary, a lot of internal work that goes into that, and trying to understand gender, femininity, masculinity, and all of the nuances in between and beyond that, right? So I think that there is a higher level often of empathy and understanding that gender nonconformant folk are operating at when engaging with folk of different gender performances. Because if they're anything like me, then they feel that gender is a destructive construct that only works for folk who have access to the initial intent and design of gender, which is usually white folk of a particular class strata, right? Otherwise, it creates a lot of contention in relationships long term, because that model is not created for you to work, right? And I think most models should work in terms of supporting each other. It should be communal. It should be based on what I'm good at versus, you know, where I'm weak, you're strong, the whole thing.
So it's this idea that, like, we're just these strong men forcing ourselves in spaces, or they go into like, you can't give birth, so, or you don't have periods, so you're not a woman. But it's like, there's a lot of cis women that don't have periods, that can't give birth, that they're leaving out, and they don't realize that they're that them, when they're being transphobic, they're punching down on those women as well.
Yeah.
So they're reducing their womanhood to being just like the terms that these Republicans use against cis women or trans women, calling them birthing canals and all this. I'm like, that's how they sound. They sound just like you calling us bonus holes and birthing canals and all this stuff, or chest feeders and stuff. Like, they sound no different than them. And they don't realize. So like that rhetoric it's okay to be used against trans women, but then they would never say it against other women. And it's like, but you're reducing them to these very like rigid things that not everyone's capable of.
They already have all the privilege, according to these cis women. Privilege that, again, those cis women lack by not being born male. So why even bother being a woman? That's the point I'm getting at here. We don't respect transgenderism, and therefore we don't respect transgender folk as being who and what they say that they are. It's just one big elaborate game of dress up to us cis folks. And that's ultimately the main problem here. So what's the solution then to all of this? Well, first, I think it begins with liberating our minds from white supremacist standards of man and womanhood that we've been conditioned with. Once we do that, we can learn to respect each other, not as man, woman, MB, or otherwise, but as human beings first. What I'm talking about is learning to respect more than just roles, more than just traits to which we assign labels based on our man-made constructs, and then what we wind up assigning to people at birth based on the way they appear at birth. What I'm talking about is seeing humanity, the humanity of a person first, before we see any of that other stuff. Since I've started this channel, one of the main recurring questions I've gotten is, how do you propose we end racism if all you're going to do is be hostile toward white people? Which, Jesus Christ, y'all get on my nerves with that. But the point I always get at is, I can't be hostile to something that isn't real. Like I keep saying this, I genuinely do not believe in whiteness outside of it being a construct and tool of oppression. I'm dead freaking serious about that. And that's why I don't have a problem making fun of white people. Again, y'all are not white. Now, I'm not going to say that male and femaleness are not real, but what I am saying is that that's pretty much where it stops. The thing between your legs doesn't dictate your role in society. The constitution of your character, who you aren't attracted to, it's not that simple. Hell, male and femaleness, if we're going to keep it a buck, ain't really that simple. But I'm not a biologist, I'm not a doctor, I'm not even going to try and to open up that Pandora's box. Hopefully y'all just take this in goodwill. I know I've screwed up a couple of times by this point, but hey, it is what it is. But the problem is, in making it simple, we made it restrictive. And furthermore said, whether in practice or in thought, one is more worthy than the other, and have ordered every other one of our actions, thoughts, and behaviors after that, both individually and as a society. That is the thing we got to fix. And we fix it, honestly, by just respecting folk and treating them on their own terms, and then leaving them the alone. Like, seriously, so many of the world's problems would be solved if we just learned how to mind our own business. And honestly, somebody needs to tell Drake that before he ends up on a sex offender list. Again, thank you to Surfshark VPN for sponsoring this video. I can eat something besides cornflakes tonight.
Plucked her eyebrows along the way, shaved the legs thin, he was a she. They said, hey, me, take a walk on the wild side. I said, hey, big boy, take a walk on the wild side.